I remember the exact moment my world began to unravel. It was a rainy Thursday evening, the kind where the sky feels heavy and the air is thick with the promise of something about to break. I was sitting at the kitchen table, half listening to the patter of rain against the window, when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Spam, I thought, or another one of those endless group chats, but something about the preview caught my eye. If you only knew who was really behind your family's fortune. My heart skipped. I stared at the screen, the words blurring as a chill crept up my spine. I glanced at my husband, Mark, who was in the living room, laughing at something on TV, completely unaware of the storm brewing just a few feet away. I opened the message, hands trembling. There was no greeting, no signature, just a single line. The truth about your family's wealth is closer than you think. Ask yourself who benefits most. I read it again, pulse racing. My family's wealth had always been a point of pride and mystery. My father, a self-made man, built his business from the ground up, or so he always said. But there were whispers, stories about a silent partner, an anonymous investor who'd saved the company from collapse years ago. We'd all speculated, but no one ever knew the truth. Until now, maybe. I looked at Mark again, suddenly seeing him in a different light. Could he know something? Was this about him? The thought seemed absurd, but the seed of doubt had been planted. I felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity, a sense that everything I thought I knew was about to change. I had to find out the truth, no matter what it cost. On the surface, my life was the kind that people envied. Our home was a sprawling, sunlit house on the edge of the city, with manicured gardens and a driveway lined with cherry trees that bloomed in a riot of pink every spring. Inside, everything gleamed. Polished wood floors, art on the walls, the faint scent of fresh flowers always lingering in the air. It was the kind of place that looked perfect in family photos, the kind of place that made people believe in fairy tales. Mark and I had been married for 12 years. He was charming, attentive, and endlessly patient with my quirks. He remembered anniversaries, brought me coffee in bed on lazy Sunday mornings, and always knew how to make me laugh when I was stressed. Our friends called us the golden couple, and sometimes, when I caught him looking at me across a crowded room, I almost believed it myself. We had 2 children, Emma, who was away at college, and Ben, still in high school, both bright, kind, and fiercely loyal to each other. Our family dinners were filled with laughter and stories, the kind of moments I'd always dreamed of as a little girl. My parents lived just a few miles away in the house where I grew up. My father, Richard, was a legend in our community, a self-made businessman who'd built his company from nothing, or so the story went. He was stern but fair, a man who believed in hard work and loyalty above all else. My mother, Grace, was his opposite in every way. Warm, effusive, the heart of every gathering. Together, they were the foundation of our family, the example we all tried to live up to. We had traditions, too. Sunday brunches at my parents' house, summer vacations at the lake, Christmases that seemed to glow with a kind of magic. There were family photos on every wall, each one a testament to years of love and togetherness. To anyone looking in from the outside, we were the embodiment of success and happiness. But beneath the surface, there were cracks, hairline fractures that only I seemed to notice. Mark worked long hours, often traveling for business, and sometimes I caught him staring off into the distance, lost in thought. When I asked what was wrong, he'd smile and say he was just tired, but there was a heaviness in his eyes that never quite went away. My father, too, had changed in recent years. He was more guarded, more prone to sudden bursts of anger or silence. He'd always been private about the business, but now he seemed almost paranoid, locking his office door and taking calls late at night. There were other things, too, small, almost imperceptible signs that something wasn't quite right. The way Mark's phone would buzz with messages he never shared, the way he'd step outside to take certain calls, the way my father would look at Mark sometimes, a flicker of something unreadable passing between them. I told myself it was nothing, that every family had its secrets, its moments of tension. But the feeling lingered, a quiet unease that I couldn't shake. Still, I clung to the image of our perfect life, I hosted dinner parties, volunteered at the local charity, and made sure our home was always warm and welcoming. I told myself that happiness was a choice, that if I just worked hard enough, I could keep everything together. I ignored the whispers, the doubts, the nagging sense that something was being kept from me. Looking back, I wonder how much of it was real and how much of it was just a story I told myself to keep the darkness at bay. I wanted to believe in the fairy tale, in the idea that love and hard work were enough to protect us from the world. But deep down, I knew that every fairy tale has its shadows, its secrets waiting to be uncovered. That night, after I received the mysterious message, I lay awake in bed, listening to Mark's steady breathing beside me. I thought about our life, the laughter, the love, the moments of quiet joy, and I wondered what it would all look like in the harsh light of truth. I wondered if the cracks would widen, if the secrets would finally come spilling out. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answers. It was a Saturday morning, the kind that always felt a little slower, a little softer, as if the world itself was taking a breath. We were gathered around my parents' dining table, sunlight streaming through the windows, the smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls filling the air. My father sat at the head of the table, reading the business section of the newspaper, his glasses perched low on his nose. My mother was fussing over the fruit salad, and Mark was telling Ben about his latest trip to Chicago, his voice animated and warm. The conversation drifted, as it always did, from the mundane to the meaningful. Emma called in from college, her voice crackling through the speakerphone, and we all laughed at her stories about dorm life and impossible professors. For a moment, everything felt normal, easy, the way it used to be before the world started to feel so complicated. But then my father cleared his throat, folding his newspaper with a deliberate slowness that caught my attention. "I had a call from the board yesterday," he said, his voice measured. "They're still talking about the expansion. It's risky, but we wouldn't even be in this position if it weren't for our benefactor." The room grew quiet. The benefactor. The anonymous investor who, years ago, had stepped in when my father's company was on the brink of collapse. It was a story we all knew by heart, though the details were always a little fuzzy. My father never spoke the investor's name, never revealed how they'd met or why this mysterious figure had chosen to save our family business. All we knew was that a single, massive investment had turned everything around, pulling us back from the edge and setting us on the path to the life we now enjoyed. I glanced at Mark, who was stirring his coffee, his expression unreadable. "Dad, have you ever tried to find out who it was?" I asked, my voice light but edged with genuine curiosity. "I mean, don't you ever wonder why someone would do something like that and stay anonymous?" My father's eyes flickered, just for a moment, before he shook his head. "Some people value their privacy, sweetheart. Maybe they just wanted to help and didn't want the attention. It's not our place to question their motives." "But don't you think it's strange?" I pressed, unable to let it go. "It's not like we're talking about a few $1,000s. This was life-changing. Don't you ever wonder if there's more to the story?" My mother shot me a warning look, the kind that said, "Let it be." Mark reached over and squeezed my hand under the table, a gentle pressure that was meant to reassure, but only made me more aware of the tension in the room. "I think your father's right," Mark said quietly. "Some people just want to do good without recognition. Maybe we should respect that." I looked at him, searching his face for any sign of something more. But he just smiled, calm and steady as always. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't saying, something he was holding back. The conversation moved on, but the air felt heavier, charged with unspoken questions. My father started talking about the company's future, about new markets and opportunities, but I barely heard him. My mind was spinning, replaying the day's conversation, the mysterious investor, the unanswered questions, and the way Mark had deflected my curiosity. I thought about the message on my phone, about the possibility that the truth was closer than I realized, and for the first time I felt a flicker of fear that the life I'd built was balanced on secrets I was only beginning to uncover. In the days that followed, I found myself watching Mark with new eyes. It wasn't that I wanted to be suspicious. If anything, I longed for the comfort of certainty, the easy trust that had always been the foundation of our marriage. But once the seed of doubt had been planted, it was impossible to ignore the small things, the subtle clues that seemed to multiply the more I paid attention. It started with his phone. Mark had always been careful with his devices, but now he seemed almost secretive. He'd silence his phone during dinner, turning it face down on the table, and if it buzzed, he'd excuse himself to the hallway or the porch to take the call. When I asked who it was, he'd shrug and say it was work or a client, or sometimes just spam. But his answers were always vague, and I noticed he never mentioned names or details. Once, I caught a glimpse of a message preview, just a string of numbers and a cryptic "confirmed" before he quickly locked the screen. Then there were the late nights. Mark had always worked hard, but lately he was coming home later and later, sometimes after midnight. He'd claim he was at the office, but when I called his work line, it would ring unanswered, or I'd get his voicemail. When he finally walked through the door, he'd look exhausted, but there was a restlessness about him, a tension in his shoulders that didn't match the calm explanations he offered. He'd kiss me on the forehead, apologize for missing dinner, and promise to make it up to me, but his eyes always seemed to be somewhere else. One evening, as I was folding laundry in our bedroom, I overheard him on the phone in his office. The door was slightly ajar, and his voice was low, urgent. "No, it has to be anonymous. That's the only way this works. No one can know." My heart pounded as I strained to hear more, but the conversation ended abruptly, and when I asked him about it later, he brushed it off as a confidential business deal. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that every marriage had its mysteries, its private corners, but the inconsistencies kept piling up. Mark's explanations about his work grew more convoluted, his travel schedules more erratic. He'd mention meetings in cities he'd never visited before, and when I asked for details, he'd change the subject or laugh it off. Once, I found a receipt for a luxury hotel in New York, dated for a weekend he told me he was in Boston. When I confronted him, he said it was a mistake, a booking error by his assistant, but the explanation felt thin, rehearsed. Money, too, became a source of confusion. Mark had always been generous, but now there were large withdrawals from our joint account, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. When I questioned him, he said it was for investments, opportunities that couldn't wait, but he never offered specifics. I started to wonder how much I really knew about our finances, about the man I'd shared my life with for over a decade. The tension between us grew, subtle but unmistakable. We still went through the motions, family dinners, weekend outings, the occasional date night, but there was a distance, a sense that we were both holding something back. I caught him watching me sometimes, his expression unreadable, as if he was waiting for me to ask the wrong question, to push too hard. One night, as we lay in bed, I turned to him and asked, "Is there something you're not telling me?" He looked at me for a long moment, then smiled, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face. "Of course not," he said softly. "You know everything that matters." But his words felt hollow, and I lay awake long after he'd fallen asleep, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing and wondering what secrets he was keeping. The doubts gnawed at me, growing louder with each passing day. I found myself replaying every conversation, every unexplained absence, every evasive answer. I wanted to believe in Mark, to trust in the life we'd built together, but the evidence was mounting, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was wrong, something big enough to threaten everything I thought I knew about my husband, my family, and the fortune that had always seemed both a blessing and a mystery. Sometimes, when the doubts became too much, I'd close my eyes and let myself drift back to the beginning, before the secrets, before the questions, when everything between Mark and me felt new and unbreakable. I remembered the first time we met, at a friend's birthday party, both of us awkward and out of place, drawn together by a shared sense of not quite belonging. He made me laugh that night, really laugh, in a way I hadn't in years. There was a gentleness to him, a quiet confidence that made me feel safe. Our early days were a whirlwind of late-night conversations and spontaneous adventures. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing, our favorite books, the places we wanted to travel, the kind of life we hoped to build. Mark listened in a way no one else ever had, as if every word I said mattered. He was attentive, thoughtful, and always seemed to know what I needed before I did. I fell for him quickly and hard. But even then, there were things he kept close to his chest. When I asked about his family, he'd give vague answers. His parents were gone, he'd say, and he didn't have any siblings. He'd change the subject when I pressed for details, his eyes clouding over with a sadness I didn't understand. I told myself it didn't matter, that everyone had their scars, their stories they weren't ready to share. I wanted to be the person he could trust, the one he'd eventually open up to. Money was another topic he avoided. He lived comfortably, but never extravagantly, and when I asked about his work, he'd describe it in broad strokes: consulting, investments, a little bit of everything. I remember one night, curled up together on the couch, I asked him if he ever worried about the future. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "I've learned not to take anything for granted. Life can change in an instant." There was a weight to his words, a hint of experience that made me wonder what he'd been through. Despite the mysteries, I trusted him. He made me feel seen, cherished, and I believed that love was enough to bridge any gap. When he proposed, it was simple and sincere. Just the two of us, a quiet promise in the middle of an ordinary day. I said yes without hesitation, certain that whatever he was holding back, we'd face it together. In those early years, we built a life filled with laughter and small joys. We celebrated our first anniversary with takeout and cheap wine, danced in the kitchen to old songs, and dreamed about the family we'd one day have. Mark was my anchor, my safe place, and I never doubted that he loved me. But looking back now, I can see the moments when he pulled away, the times he'd retreat into himself, lost in thought, or the way he'd tense up when I asked about his past. I see now that the walls were always there, invisible but impenetrable, and I wonder if I ever really knew the man I married. I wanted to believe that love could conquer anything, that trust was enough. But as the years passed, the questions I'd once ignored began to feel like cracks in the foundation of our life together, threatening to bring everything crashing down. The call came early on a Tuesday morning, jolting me awake before the sun had even risen. My phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand, and when I answered, my father's voice was tight with panic. "We need everyone at the house, now." He didn't offer any explanation, but the urgency in his tone left no room for questions. I shook Mark awake, my heart pounding, and within minutes we were dressed and out the door, the city still shrouded in darkness as we drove toward my parents' home. When we arrived, the house was already buzzing with activity. My mother was pacing the foyer, her face pale and drawn, while Ben hovered nearby, wide-eyed and anxious. My father stood in his study, surrounded by stacks of papers and his two most trusted advisors, his jaw clenched as he barked orders into the phone. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made every breath feel heavy. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling as I stepped into the room. My father barely looked up, waving a hand at the chaos around him. "It's the company. There's been a leak. Confidential information, financials, everything. The press is already running with it. Our stock is plummeting, and the board is in a panic. If we don't get ahead of this, we could lose everything." The words hit me like a physical blow. Our family's wealth, our security, everything we'd built, it all hung in the balance, threatened by forces I couldn't even see. My mother sank into a chair, her hands shaking as she tried to process the news. Ben looked to me for reassurance, but I had none to give. In the midst of the chaos, Mark stood apart, his expression calm and unreadable. While my father raged and my mother wept, Mark quietly moved through the room, offering a steadying hand on my shoulder, a reassuring word to Ben. He listened intently as my father explained the situation, asking pointed questions about the leak, the company's vulnerabilities, and the steps being taken to contain the damage.
I watched him, a strange sense of detachment settling over me. How could he be so composed when everything was falling apart? I wanted to shake him, to demand that he show some emotion, some sign that he understood the gravity of what was happening. But instead, he remained steady, almost clinical in his approach. As the morning wore on, the crisis deepened. News outlets picked up the story, speculating wildly about the company's future. Investors began to pull out, and the board called an emergency meeting to discuss possible solutions. My father grew more agitated with each passing hour, snapping at anyone who dared to suggest that the situation was out of his control. At one point, I found Mark in the kitchen, calmly making coffee as if it were any other day. "How can you be so calm?" I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, his eyes steady. "Panicking won't help anyone," he said softly. "Your father needs clear heads right now. We'll get through this." His words were meant to comfort, but they only fueled my frustration. I wanted him to be angry, to be scared, to feel the same sense of helplessness that was threatening to swallow me whole. Instead, he offered solutions, suggesting legal counsel, recommending a public relations strategy, even offering to reach out to contacts who might be able to help stabilize the situation. The rest of the family clung to his calm, grateful for any sign of hope. My father, though initially resistant, began to listen to Mark's advice, delegating tasks and focusing on damage control. My mother leaned on him, her anxiety easing in the presence of his quiet confidence. Even Ben seemed reassured, following Mark's lead as we tried to keep the household running amid the chaos. But beneath the surface, my doubts only grew. How could Mark be so prepared, so knowledgeable about the intricacies of the business and the steps needed to weather the storm? It was as if he'd anticipated this crisis, as if he'd been waiting for it all along. I found myself watching him more closely, searching for any sign that he was hiding something, that he knew more than he was letting on. As the day faded into night, the crisis showed no signs of abating. My father retreated to his study, my mother went to bed exhausted, and Ben disappeared into his room with his headphones on. Mark and I sat together in the quiet kitchen, the weight of the day pressing down on us. He reached for my hand, his touch warm and steady. "We'll get through this," he repeated, his voice gentle. I nodded, but inside, the questions churned. Who was this man I'd married, and what secrets was he keeping from me? As I stared into the darkness outside the window, I realized that the crisis threatening my family was only the beginning, and that the answers I sought might be more dangerous than I ever imagined. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet, as if the chaos of the previous day had drained all the energy from its walls. I woke to the sound of my father's voice echoing down the hallway, sharp and incredulous. I hurried to the study, where he stood clutching a letter, his hands trembling, not with fear, but with something closer to disbelief. He looked up as I entered, his eyes wide. "It's happened again," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The investor, the anonymous one. They've come through for us, just like before." He handed me the letter, and I scanned its contents, my heart pounding. It was brief and to the point, a promise of a substantial cash infusion, enough to stabilize the company and silence the rumors swirling in the press. The only condition was that the investor's identity remained secret. There was no signature, just a familiar insignia, a simple, elegant mark that I'd seen once before, years ago, when the family was first saved from ruin. My father's relief was palpable. He slumped into his chair, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in days. "Whoever this is, they've saved us again," he murmured almost to himself. "We owe them everything." The rest of the family gathered in the study as the news spread. My mother wept tears of gratitude, clutching my father's hand. Ben, still groggy from sleep, tried to make sense of it all. Mark stood in the corner, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He offered a few words of support, but I noticed he didn't ask any questions, didn't seem surprised at all. As the day unfolded, the company's fortunes began to turn. The press, once hungry for scandal, now reported on the miraculous bailout. Investors returned, the board breathed a collective sigh of relief, and my father's reputation was restored. The crisis, it seemed, had passed. But for me, the mystery had only deepened. I couldn't stop thinking about the investor, their timing, their generosity, their insistence in remaining in the shadows. Why would someone do this, not once, but twice? What did they stand to gain? And why did it feel in some strange way as if the whole thing was orchestrated, as if someone was pulling the strings from behind the scenes? I found myself replaying every conversation, every detail from the past few days, Mark's calm during the crisis, his knowledge of the business, the way he'd deflected my questions about the investor. The memory of his late-night phone calls, his secretive behavior, the cryptic messages on his phone, all of it swirled in my mind, forming a pattern I couldn't quite decipher. I became obsessed. I scoured old emails and financial records, searching for any clue that might reveal the investor's identity. I questioned my father, pressing him for details about the first bailout, but he insisted he knew nothing. He said they contacted me through a lawyer, frustration creeping into his voice. All I know is that they saved us, twice. I even tried to talk to Mark, hoping he might have some insight. It's probably just a wealthy philanthropist, he said with a shrug, avoiding my gaze. Someone who believes in your father's vision. But his answer felt rehearsed, too easy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something, that he knew more than he was letting on. At night, I lay awake, my mind racing with possibilities. Was the investor a family friend? A rival looking to gain leverage? Or was it someone closer, someone who had everything to lose or gain from our family's fate? The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that the answer was right in front of me, hidden in plain sight. I started to notice things I'd overlooked before. The way Mark always seemed to know when the company was in trouble. The way he'd offer solutions before anyone else even understood the problem. The way he'd brush off my questions, change the subject, or disappear for hours at a time. It was as if he was living a double life, one foot in our world and one in the shadows. The obsession consumed me. I found myself snapping at the kids, distracted at work, unable to focus on anything but the mystery. My friends noticed the change, but I brushed off their concerns, telling them I was just tired, just stressed. But the truth was, I was terrified. Terrified of what I might find if I kept digging, and even more terrified of what it would mean for my family, for my marriage, for everything I thought I knew.
The anonymous savior had returned, and with them 1,000 questions I couldn't answer. But one thing was certain. I wouldn't rest until I uncovered the truth, no matter how deep I had to dig or how painful the answers might be. I became a woman possessed. The need to know the truth gnawed at me, sharper with every passing day. I waited until Mark left for work, then moved through the house with a careful, practiced quiet, as if the walls themselves might betray me. I started in his home office, a space I'd always respected as his domain, but now every drawer, every folder, every slip of paper felt like a potential clue. At first, I found nothing unusual. Just the expected bills, tax returns, and the neat methodical records of a man who prided himself on order. But then, tucked behind a stack of old magazines in the bottom drawer, I found a slim black folder. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were bank statements from accounts I'd never seen before, with balances that made my breath catch. Transfers in and out, some in staggering amounts, all carefully documented, but with cryptic notations. Project A, consultant fee, holdings transfer. The names of the banks were international, places Mark had never mentioned visiting. I snapped photos of everything, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure someone would hear. I moved onto his laptop, which was always password protected. I'd watched him type it in 100 times, and after a few tries, my fingers found the right combination. The desktop was clean, almost too clean, but I knew where to look. In a folder labeled Work, buried beneath layers of subfolders, I found a series of emails, most encrypted, some with attachments I couldn't open. The subject lines were vague: update, confirmation, next steps. The senders were anonymous, just strings of numbers and letters. I forwarded what I could to my own email, careful to erase any trace of my activity. Each message I managed to open was more confusing than the last. There were references to wire transfers, shell companies, and legal agreements that made my head spin. One email in particular stood out. All actions remain confidential, no direct contact. Beneficiary must not be aware. My blood ran cold. Was I the beneficiary? Was my father? Or was it all about Mark? I dug deeper, searching for anything that might connect these documents to the mysterious investor. I found a scanned copy of a contract, the signature line blank, but the terms were clear: a massive sum to be invested, with the stipulation that the investor's identity remains secret. The company listed as the sender was one I'd never heard of, but a quick search revealed it was a holding company based overseas, notorious for shielding the identities of its clients. The more I uncovered, the less I understood. Every answer led to another question, every document another layer of secrecy. I started to doubt my own judgment, wondering if I was seeing patterns where none existed, if my obsession was blinding me to the truth. But the evidence was there, undeniable and damning. Mark was involved in something far bigger than I'd ever imagined, something that touched every part of our lives. I began to keep a notebook, jotting down every detail, every date, every name that appeared in the documents. I mapped out connections, trying to make sense of the web I was unraveling. I barely slept, haunted by the fear that I was missing something crucial, that the truth was slipping through my fingers. At night, I lay beside Mark, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, wondering how much of the man I loved was real and how much was a carefully constructed lie. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but I was afraid of what he might say, and even more afraid of what he might not. The secrets I uncovered were like pieces of a puzzle, each one more bewildering than the last. I was no closer to understanding who the anonymous investor was, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me that Mark was at the center of it all. And as the questions mounted, so did my resolve. I would not stop until I knew everything, no matter the cost. I couldn't keep the questions inside any longer. The weight of what I'd found pressed on me, making it impossible to look at Mark without feeling a surge of anger, confusion, and heartbreak. That evening, after dinner, I waited until the kids had retreated to their rooms and the house was quiet. Mark was in his study, reading over some documents, the lamplight casting long shadows across his face. I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear my own voice. "Mark, we need to talk," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. He looked up, surprised, but quickly masked it with a smile. "Of course. What's on your mind?" I stepped into the room, closing the door behind me. I could feel my hands shaking, so I clenched them at my sides. "I want to know the truth, about your work, about the money, about the anonymous investor who keeps saving my family." He set his papers aside, his expression carefully neutral. "We've talked about this before. I consult. I invest. You know that." "Don't lie to me," my voice broke, and I hated how vulnerable I sounded. "I've seen the bank statements, the emails, the contracts. I know you're involved in something you haven't told me about. I know you're hiding things from me." He stared at me, his jaw tightening. For a moment, I thought he might confess, that the dam would finally break. But instead, he shook his head, his eyes darkening with something I couldn't read. "You've been going through my things?" he asked quietly, his voice trembling with a mix of hurt and anger. I ignored the accusation. "I had to. You left me no choice. Mark, please, just tell me the truth. Are you the investor? Are you the one who's been bailing out my father's company?" He stood up, running his hair through his head, pacing the length of the room. "You're being ridiculous. Why would I do that? Why would I keep something like that from you?" "Because you're always calm when things go wrong. Because you know things you shouldn't. Because every time my family is in trouble, you're right there with a solution. And because I've found proof, bank accounts, transfers, contracts, all of it points to you." He stopped pacing, turning to face me. His eyes were shining, and for a moment I saw fear there, real, raw fear. "You don't understand what you're saying. You don't know what you're getting into." "Then help me understand," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "I'm your wife, Mark. I deserve to know the truth. I deserve to know who I'm married to." He looked away, his shoulders slumping. "It's not that simple," he said, almost to himself. "There are things you don't know, things I can't explain." "Try me," I said, stepping closer. "I want to hear it from you. No more secrets." He shook his head again, tears glistening in his eyes. "I can't, not now. Please, just trust me." "Trust you?" I laughed bitterly. "How can I trust you when you've built our life on lies?" He flinched, and for a moment I thought he might break. But then he straightened, wiping his eyes, his face hardening. "I'm not the villain you think I am," he said quietly. "Everything I've done, I did for you, for us, for your family." "Then prove it," I challenged. "Show me. Tell me everything." He shook his head again, moving toward the door. "I can't. Not tonight." He brushed past me, leaving me alone in the study, my heart pounding with frustration and fear. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He hadn't denied it, not really, but he hadn't confessed either. His evasiveness, his emotion, the way he'd looked at me, all of it told me there was more to the story, something he was desperate to keep hidden.
I sank into his chair, my mind racing. I needed more. I needed proof, something undeniable, something he couldn't talk his way out of. I glanced around the room, searching for anything I might have missed. That's when I noticed the rug in the corner, slightly askew. I got up and moved it aside, revealing a small, almost invisible seam in the floorboards. My hands shook as I pried at the edge, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. The board lifted, revealing a hidden safe embedded in the floor. My heart leapt into my throat. I stared at it, 1,000 thoughts racing through my mind. What was inside? More documents? Money? The final piece of the puzzle? I knelt beside the safe, running my fingers over the cold metal. I didn't know the combination, but I was determined to find a way in. I sat back on my heels, the weight of what I'd discovered pressing down on me. The confrontation with Mark had left me shaken, but now I was more certain than ever that the truth was within my reach. As I closed the study door behind me, I glanced down the hallway, half expecting Mark to appear, to stop me, to finally tell me everything. But the house was silent, the only sound my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. I knew I was standing on the edge of something huge, something that could change everything, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what I might find. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my mind still tangled in the events of the night before. Mark had left early, claiming he had meetings, but I knew he was running from the confrontation, from the questions he couldn't or wouldn't answer. The house was silent, the kids still asleep, and I moved through the halls with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in days. I returned to the study, heart pounding, and knelt beside the hidden safe. I stared at the dial, willing myself to remember any numbers that might matter, birthdays, anniversaries, addresses. My hands trembled as I tried combinations, each failed attempt ratcheting up my anxiety. Then, almost without thinking, I tried our wedding date. The lock clicked, and the door swung open with a soft metallic sigh. Inside, the safe was packed with folders, envelopes, and a small velvet-lined box. I reached for the folders first, my fingers numb as I flipped through the contents. There were bank statements from accounts all over the world, each with balances that made my head spin. The numbers were staggering, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, all in Mark's name or in the names of shell companies I'd never heard of. There were deeds to properties in cities I'd only dreamed of visiting, stock certificates for companies I knew my father's business depended on, and a thick stack of legal documents, all stamped and notarized, all bearing Mark's signature. I found a folder labeled Holdings, Our Family, and my breath caught. Inside were detailed records of investments made directly into my father's company, each one timed perfectly to coincide with the moments of crisis that had threatened to destroy us. The anonymous investor wasn't just a silent partner. He was the lifeline, the reason my family's fortune had survived. And it was Mark, my husband, the man I thought I knew better than anyone. A wave of betrayal crashed over me, so strong it nearly knocked me to the floor. I pressed a hand to my mouth, fighting back tears as I tried to process what I was seeing. Every secret, every lie, every moment of doubt suddenly made sense. Mark had been living a double life, hiding not just his wealth, but his power, his influence over my family's fate. He had saved us, yes, but he had also controlled us, shaping our lives from the shadows. I opened the velvet-lined box and found a simple gold ring, identical to the one Mark wore on his right hand. Inside the lid was an inscription, "For the life we built together and the secrets I keep to protect it." My vision blurred as I read the words, the weight of his love and his deception pressing down on me in equal measure. I sat back on my heels, the evidence spread out before me, and let the tears fall. I thought of every moment we'd shared, every promise he'd made, every time I'd looked into his eyes and believed I was seeing the whole truth. I thought of my father, my mother, my children, everyone who had been touched by Mark's choices, everyone who had lived in the shadow of his secrets. The anger came next, hot and blinding. How could he do this to me? How could he lie year after year pretending to be just another husband, another father, while holding the keys to our entire world? I wanted to scream, to tear the room apart, to make him feel the pain he'd caused. But beneath the anger was something else, a deep, aching sadness. I realized that Mark had carried this burden alone for so long, sacrificing his own peace for the sake of our family. He had saved us, yes, but at what cost? And what did it mean for us, now, for the life we'd built on a foundation of secrets and half-truths? I gathered the documents, my hands steady now, and closed the safe. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself, couldn't pretend that nothing had changed. The truth was out, and there was no going back. I had to decide what to do next, whether to confront Mark again, to tell my family, to try to forgive, or to walk away. As I left the study, the morning sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the floor. I felt hollow, emptied out by the weight of what I'd discovered. But I also felt something else, a strange, fierce resolve. The secrets were no longer hidden. The choice, at last, was mine. I waited for Mark to come home. The evidence from the safe spread out on the dining table like the aftermath of a storm. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the clock and the distant hum of traffic outside. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the documents, my mind replaying every moment of our marriage, every conversation that now felt like a riddle with a missing answer. When I heard the garage door open, my heart began to race. I stood, bracing myself, as Mark walked in, his face tired, his eyes shadowed. He stopped short when he saw the table. For a long moment he just stared, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at me, and I saw the resignation in his eyes, the look of a man who knows the game is up. "I found the safe," I said, my voice steady, though my hands were shaking. "I know everything, Mark. The accounts, the investments, the contracts. You're the anonymous investor. You've been controlling my family's fate for years." He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. "I never wanted you to find out this way." I felt a surge of anger, hot and raw. How else was I supposed to find out? Were you ever going to tell me, or was I just supposed to keep living in the dark, trusting you while you lied to my face? He stepped forward, but I held up a hand, stopping him. "Don't. Just don't. I want to hear the truth. All of it. No more secrets." Mark's shoulders slumped. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, the weight of years of secrets pressing down on him. He pulled out a chair and sat across from me, his hands folded on the table.
"I did it for you," he said quietly, "for your family. When I met you, I saw how much you loved them, how much they meant to you. I knew about your father's business troubles before you did. I had the means to help, and I did. At first, it was just an investment, anonymous, no strings attached. But then your father's company needed more, and I kept stepping in. I thought I could keep it separate, keep it from touching us, but it got complicated." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "You lied to me, Mark, for years. You let me believe you were just my husband, just a part of the family, while you were pulling the strings behind the scenes. Do you have any idea how that feels?" He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I know I hurt you. I know I should have told you, but I was afraid of what it would do to us, to your family. Your father is a proud man. If he knew the truth, it would destroy him. He'd never accept that his son-in-law was the one keeping his legacy alive." I laughed bitterly. "So you lied to protect his pride? What about me? What about our marriage?" He looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was protecting you, too. I didn't want you to feel like you owed me or that our life together was built on something you didn't choose. I wanted you to love me, not for what I could give you." The anger in me flared again. "You made that choice for me. You decided what I could handle, what I deserved to know. That's not love, Mark. That's control." He flinched, tears welling in his eyes. I know I messed up, but you have to understand, my whole life I've been taught to hide, to protect myself. My parents lost everything because they trusted the wrong people. I swore I'd never let that happen to the people I loved. When I met you, I wanted to be the man you deserved, not the man with secrets and scars." I stared at him, my own tears falling now. "You should have trusted me. We could have faced it together." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "I see that now. But I was so afraid of losing you, of losing the life we built. Every time I thought about telling you, I convinced myself it was better this way, that I was protecting you. But I see now that I was just protecting myself." The room was thick with emotion. Anger, grief, love, and betrayal all tangled together. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him feel the pain I was feeling. But I also saw the boy he'd once been, the man who'd tried so hard to do the right thing and failed. We sat in silence for a long time, the truth hanging between us like a storm cloud. Finally, I spoke, my voice trembling. "What do we do now, Mark? How do we move forward from this?" He looked at me, his eyes red and raw. "I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust again. I'll tell your father the truth, if that's what you want. I'll walk away from the company, from the money. None of it matters if I lose you." I shook my head, the ache in my chest almost unbearable. "It's not that simple. You can't just undo years of secrets. I need time. I need to figure out if I can forgive you, if I can ever trust you again." He nodded, accepting my words with a quiet dignity. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes." As he stood to leave, I saw the man I'd fallen in love with, the man who'd tried, in his own flawed way, to protect the people he loved. But I also saw the consequences of his choices, the damage done by secrets and lies. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing: the truth was out, and nothing would ever be the same. The next day, the air in our house was thick with tension, every word and movement heavy with the weight of what had been revealed. I barely slept, replaying the argument with Mark over and over, my mind caught between anger and heartbreak. But I knew what had to come next. The truth couldn't stay between us. My family deserved to know, no matter how much it hurt. I called my parents and told them to come over, telling them only that it was important. My mother's voice was worried, my father's terse. Ben lingered in the kitchen, sensing something was wrong, while Emma, home from college for the weekend, watched me with wide, anxious eyes. Mark sat at the dining table, his hands folded, his face pale but resolute. He had agreed to tell them himself, to finally step out of the shadows and face the consequences of his choices. When my parents arrived, the tension in the room was palpable. My father's eyes darted from me to Mark, suspicion already brewing. My mother reached for my hand, her grip tight. "What's going on?" she whispered. I took a deep breath, my voice trembling as I began. "There's something you all need to know, something Mark and I should have told you a long time ago." Mark stood, his voice steady but soft. "I owe you all the truth. I am the anonymous investor who's been supporting the company. Every time the business was in trouble, every time you thought a stranger had come to the rescue, it was me." The words hung in the air, impossible to take back. For a moment, no one moved. My father's face went white, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for words. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Ben looked from me to Mark, confusion and disbelief warring on his face. Emma's eyes filled with tears. My father was the first to speak, his voice shaking with rage. "You? All this time it was you? You let me believe I'd been saved by a stranger, that I'd rebuilt everything on my own, when it was you pulling the strings behind the scenes?" Mark nodded, his eyes never leaving my father's. "I never wanted to take anything from you. I only wanted to help. I saw how hard you worked, how much you cared about your legacy. I thought I could do some good without interfering, without making you feel indebted." My father's fists clenched on the table. "You lied to me. You lied to all of us. You let me believe I was a self-made man, that I'd earned back everything I lost, but it was all a lie. My pride, my reputation, built on your money, your secrets." Tears streamed down my mother's face. "Why, Mark? Why didn't you tell us? We trusted you, your family." Mark's voice broke. "I was afraid of what it would do to you, to all of us. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that I was only protecting myself. I didn't want to lose your respect, your love. I didn't want to be the reason you felt weak or dependent." Ben slammed his fist on the table, his voice cracking. "So all those times Dad said we'd made it through on our own, it was just you writing a check? Did you ever think about how that would make us feel?" Emma wiped her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "You should have trusted us. We're your family." The room erupted into chaos, shouts, tears, accusations flying back and forth. My father stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. My mother followed, sobbing. Ben retreated to his room, slamming the door behind him. Emma sat at the table, her head in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I stood in the middle of it all, numb and exhausted. Mark reached for me, but I pulled away, needing space to breathe, to think. The truth had finally come out, but instead of bringing relief, it had torn us apart. I found my father in the backyard, pacing furiously. I approached him slowly, my heart aching at the sight of him, this proud, strong man brought low by a secret he never saw coming. "Dad," I said softly, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know either. I only found out yesterday." He stopped, turning to me with eyes full of pain. How could he do this to me? To us? I thought I'd earned everything back. I thought I was strong, but it was all a lie. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "You are strong. You built this family. Mark only wanted to help. He made mistakes, but he never wanted to hurt you." He looked away, his voice breaking. "I don't know if I can ever forgive him, or you for keeping it from me." I reached for his hand, but he pulled away, retreating into himself. I watched him walk away, my heart breaking for the man who had always been my hero. Inside, the house was silent, the aftermath of the revelation settling like dust. Mark sat alone at the table, staring at his hands. I sat beside him, not touching, not speaking, just sharing the silence. The truth was out, and nothing would ever be the same. The family I'd always believed was unbreakable now felt fragile, splintered by secrets and betrayal. I didn't know how we would heal, or if we ever could, but I knew one thing: the only way forward was honesty, no matter how much it hurt. The days that followed the revelation felt like living in a house of ghosts. Everyone moved through the motions, eating, sleeping, speaking in short, clipped sentences, but the warmth was gone. My father refused to take Mark's calls. My mother cried when she thought no one was looking. Ben barely spoke to either of us, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. Emma returned to college early, unable to bear the tension, and Mark and I existed in a strange limbo, sleeping in the same bed but miles apart, strangers in our own home. I felt like I was drowning, suffocated by the weight of everything I'd learned. Every time I looked at Mark, I saw both the man I'd loved for 12 years and the stranger who'd kept secrets that changed everything. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think beyond the single impossible question that consumed me. Should I stay or should I leave? One afternoon, I called my best friend, Rebecca. We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one knew us. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a tight hug. "Tell me everything," she said. I did. The words poured out of me. The secret fortune, the anonymous investments, the years of lies, the explosive confrontation, the family's devastation. By the time I finished, I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. Rebecca handed me napkin after napkin, her own eyes glistening with tears. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice broken. "How do I make a decision this big?" She was quiet for a long moment, then took my hand. "Only you can answer that, but I'll tell you what I see. I see a man who made terrible choices, yes, but I also see a man who loved you enough to try to protect your family, even if he did it the wrong way. The question isn't whether he was wrong, he was. The question is whether you can forgive him and whether he's willing to change." I nodded, wiping my eyes. "I don't know if I can trust him again. How do you rebuild trust after something like this?" "Slowly," she said, "one day at a time. But you have to decide if he's worth the effort, and you have to be honest with yourself about what you need to be happy." That night, I took a long walk through the neighborhood, past houses glowing with warm light, families visible through windows, living their simple, uncomplicated lives. I envied them. I thought about my marriage, the laughter, the moments of quiet intimacy, the way that Mark had always made me feel seen and cherished. I thought about the lies, the betrayal, the way he'd made decisions for me without letting me have a voice. I thought about my children and what message I'd be sending them by staying or leaving. Would staying teach them that love means accepting betrayal, or would it teach them that forgiveness and growth are possible even after profound mistakes? Would leaving teach them to have standards, to demand honesty, or would it teach them to run when things get hard? I sat on a bench in the park, staring up at the stars, and let myself feel everything: the anger, the grief, the love, the confusion. I realized that I didn't have to make a decision right now. I didn't have to forgive Mark today or next week or even next month. I just had to decide what I need in this moment. When I came home, Mark was waiting in the kitchen, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "I know you're thinking about leaving," he said quietly, "and I wouldn't blame you. But I need you to know that I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Therapy, full transparency, stepping away from the investments, anything. I just need a chance." I looked at him, this man I'd built a life with, and felt the pull of both love and pain. "I need time," I said. "I need space to figure out who I am without all the lies. I'm not saying I'm leaving forever, but I can't stay here now, not like this." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. I'll wait as long as it takes." That night, I packed a small bag and drove to Rebecca's house. She welcomed me without questions, setting up the guest room and making tea. As I lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt terrified and strangely free. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if my marriage could survive this, or if my family would ever heal. But I knew one thing: the only way forward was honesty, no matter how much it hurt.
The breaking point had come, and I'd chosen myself. Whatever happened next, I would face it on my own terms, with honesty and courage. And that, at least, felt like a start. It was a week after I left home when the call came. I was at Rebecca's, folding laundry and trying to distract myself from the ache in my chest when my phone rang. It was Emma, her voice trembling. "Mom, it's Grandpa. He collapsed at the office. They're taking him to the hospital. Please come." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. I dropped everything and rushed to the hospital, my heart pounding with fear.
The waiting room was already filled with my family, my mother, pale and shaken, Ben, silent and withdrawn, Emma, eyes red from crying. Mark was there too, standing apart from the others, his face etched with worry. The doctor came out, his expression grave but not hopeless. "Your father had a mild heart attack. He's stable now, but he'll need rest and a lot less stress. I suggest you all support him and help manage his responsibilities for a while." The news was a relief, but it also brought a new kind of urgency. My father's business was still in turmoil, and now he couldn't be at the helm. My mother looked at me, her eyes pleading. "We can't do this alone. We need to work together." For the first time since the truth had come out, we all sat in the same room, forced to put aside our anger and pain. The company needed immediate attention, contracts to review, employees to reassure, decisions to make. My father's legacy was on the line, and so was our family's future. Mark stepped forward, his voice steady but humble. "I know I've hurt you all. I know you don't trust me right now, but I have the experience and the resources to help. Let me do this for your family, for all of us." There was a long, tense silence. My mother nodded first, then Ben, and finally Emma. I hesitated, searching Mark's face for any sign of manipulation or self-interest, but all I saw was genuine concern and a willingness to do whatever it took to make things right. We divided the tasks. Mark and I would handle the business side, Emma and Ben would help at home, and my mother would care for my father. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and late nights. Mark worked tirelessly, reaching out to contacts, negotiating with partners, and reassuring employees. He was transparent about every decision, looping me in on every call, every email, every document. For the first time, there were no secrets between us. I saw a different side of him, a man who was not just brilliant and resourceful, but also patient and kind. He listened to my ideas, respected my opinions, and never made a move without my input. When I faltered, overwhelmed by the pressure, he was there with a steady hand and a quiet word of encouragement. The rest of the family began to see it too. Ben, who had been so angry, started to thaw, asking Mark for advice and even sharing a laugh with him over dinner. Emma confided in him about her worries for Grandpa, and my mother, though still wary, thanked him for his help. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Mark and I sat together in the hospital cafeteria. The exhaustion in his eyes was matched only by the hope I saw there. "I know I can't undo the past," he said softly, "but I want to build something better, starting now. No more secrets, no more lies. Just us working together." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man I'd fallen in love with. The man who had made terrible mistakes, yes, but who was trying every day to be better. I realized that forgiveness wasn't a single act, but a process, a choice I would have to make again and again if I wanted to move forward. As my father recovered, the family began to heal. The business stabilized, the tension eased, and laughter slowly returned to our home. We were still fragile, still mending, but we were doing it together. The emergency had forced us to confront not just our pain, but our love for each other. It reminded us that beneath the secrets and the anger, we were still a family. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hope, real, honest hope, that we could find our way back to each other, one day at a time. It was late, the house finally quiet after another long day of hospital visits and business calls. My father was home, resting in his favorite chair, the color slowly returning to his cheeks. The kids were asleep, my mother dozing on the couch, a book slipping from her hands. I found Mark in the backyard, sitting on the old wooden bench beneath the maple tree, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light. He looked up as I stepped outside, his eyes searching mine, uncertain but hopeful. I sat beside him, the night air cool and gentle. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was different now, not heavy with secrets, but filled with the possibility of something new. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything we'd been through pressing down on me. and then I let it go. "Mark," I began, my voice trembling, "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forget what happened. The lies, the secrets, they hurt. They changed everything I thought I knew about us." He nodded, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I know. I think about it every day. I wish I could go back and do things differently. I wish I'd trusted you enough to tell you the truth from the start." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the pain in his eyes, the regret, the longing, the love. "Why didn't you?" I asked softly. "Why did you think you had to carry it all alone?" He sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I was scared. Scared of losing you. Scared of what your family would think. Scared of not being enough. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that I was just protecting myself. I didn't want you to see the parts of me that were broken, the parts that didn't fit the life we built together." I reached for his hand, my fingers trembling as they closed around his. "I should have trusted you, Mark. We promised each other honesty, no matter what. I would have stood by you, Mark. I would have helped you carry it." He squeezed my hand, tears glistening in his eyes. "I know. I see that now. I'm so sorry for all of it. For the lies, for the pain I caused you, for not believing in us enough to share the truth." We sat in silence, the night wrapping around us like a blanket. I thought about everything we'd survived, the betrayals, the heartbreak, the moments when it felt like we might never find our way back. I thought about the love that had brought us together, the family we built, the life we'd shared, and I realized that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past, but about choosing to move forward together.
"I want to try," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I want to try to forgive you, to rebuild what we lost, but I need you to promise me. No more secrets, no more lies. If we're going to do this, it has to be real. It has to be honest." He nodded, his voice breaking. "I promise. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, whatever you need. I just want a chance to make things right." I leaned into him, resting my head on his shoulder. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. Not because everything was perfect, but because we were finally facing the truth together. Inside the house, I could hear the faint sound of laughter, my mother and father talking quietly in the living room, the tension between them easing. Ben and Emma sharing stories in the kitchen, their voices soft and hopeful. The family was beginning to heal, the wounds slowly closing as we learned to trust each other again. Over the next few days, we talked, really talked. We shared our fears, our hopes, our regrets. We listened to each other, sometimes through tears, sometimes through laughter. We apologized, forgave, and promised to do better. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the pain felt too raw, when the memories threatened to pull us under. But we kept going, one conversation at a time, one day at a time. Mark reached out to my father, asking for a chance to explain, to make amends. It was awkward at first, the wounds still fresh, but slowly my father began to see the man behind the mistakes, the man who had loved his family enough to risk everything, even if he'd done it the wrong way. My mother, too, found it in her heart to forgive, her warmth returning as she saw the effort Mark was making to rebuild the trust he'd broken. As for me, I learned to let go of the anger, to see Mark not as the sum of his secrets, but as the man I'd chosen to build a life with. I learned that love isn't about perfection, but about resilience, the willingness to stay, to fight, to forgive. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Mark took my hand and looked into my eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me another chance, for believing in us." I smiled, tears slipping down my cheeks. "We're not perfect, Mark, but we're still here, and that's enough." In that moment, I knew we would be okay. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but we would walk it together, one step at a time. And as the stars appeared overhead, I felt hope blooming in my heart, a hope that after everything we'd been through, we could still find our way back to each other and to the family we'd almost lost. The weeks that followed were filled with small, deliberate steps, each one a test of our resolve, each one a chance to choose trust over fear. Mark and I started therapy together, sitting side by side in a quiet office, learning how to speak honestly and listen without judgment. It wasn't easy.
There were days when old wounds reopened, when anger and sadness threatened to drown out the progress we'd made. But we kept showing up, kept trying, kept reminding ourselves that healing was a process, not a destination. We set new boundaries, clear and unbreakable. Mark agreed to full transparency. No more secret accounts, no more hidden meetings, no more decisions made in the dark. Every financial move, every business conversation, every difficult choice would be shared. I promised to voice my doubts and fears instead of letting them fester in silence. We both agreed that honesty, even when it hurt, was the only way forward. At home, the changes were subtle but profound. We ate dinner together every night. No phones, no distractions, just the four of us around the table, learning how to be a family again. We talked about our days, our worries, our hopes for the future. Sometimes the conversations were awkward, sometimes they were painful, but they were always real. The kids, still wary, began to open up, testing the new boundaries we'd set, searching for the safety they'd lost. Ben started asking questions about the business, about what had happened, and Mark answered every one, no matter how uncomfortable. Emma, home for a weekend, sat with me late into the night, her head on my shoulder, as we talked about forgiveness and what it meant to start over. My parents, too, began to heal. My father, though still wounded by the truth, found a strange comfort in Mark's honesty. They started meeting once a week, not as business partners, but as family, two men learning how to trust each other again. My mother, ever the peacemaker, filled the house with warmth and laughter, determined to remind us all that love was still possible, even after betrayal. There were setbacks, of course, moments when the old pain resurfaced, when a careless word or a forgotten promise threatened to unravel the fragile peace we'd built. But each time we chose to face it together, to talk it through, to forgive and try again. We learned that trust wasn't something you could demand or expect. It was something you had to earn, day by day, choice by choice. Mark and I made a new commitment to each other, one that went beyond the vows we'd spoken years ago. We promised to be partners in every sense of the word, to share the burdens and the joys, to make decisions together, to never let fear or pride come between us again. We wrote down our promises, tucked them into a drawer in our bedroom, a quiet reminder of the new life we were building. The future was uncertain, the business was still recovering, the family still mending. There were no guarantees, no easy answers, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I saw a path forward, not perfect, not without pain, but real and honest and ours. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Mark took my hand and looked into my eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me another chance, for believing in us." I smiled, tears slipping down my cheeks. "We're not perfect, Mark, but we're still here, and that's enough." In that moment, I knew we would be okay. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but we would walk it together, one step at a time. And as the stars appeared overhead, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. We had survived the storm, we had faced the truth, and we had chosen each other again and again. The road ahead would not be easy, but we would walk it together, one step at a time. And in that moment, I knew this was our new beginning. Looking back, I realized that secrets have a way of shaping us, of testing the very foundation of who we are and what we believe. Our family was nearly torn apart by the truth, but in the end, it was honesty and the willingness to face our pain together that gave us a second chance. We're still learning, still healing, but we're doing it as a family, one honest conversation at a time. If you've ever wondered what it takes to rebuild trust after betrayal, or how far love can stretch before it breaks, know that you're not alone. Our story isn't perfect, but it's real, and sometimes that's enough. But if you thought this secret was big, wait until you hear what happened when the truth went public. The aftermath was more explosive than any of us could have imagined, and the choices we made next would change our lives forever. So stay tuned, because the next chapter is one you won't want to miss.